Now we'll see how organisms obtain their food. So this I already told you before. You have unicellular organisms and multicellular organisms. Based on the body designs, organisms will have different methods or processes of obtaining nutrition. So if you talk about unicellular organisms, these are basically very simple organisms. Okay, they will have only one cell in their body. So they will not have any specialized kind of nutrition systems in their body. So this happens by a simple method of diffusion. So this method of diffusion you have already studied in your previous grades. So can you recollect what you mean by diffusion? So diffusion is a method where, or it's a process where the substances are diffused from the region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. So if you remember in your 8th grade, 7th grade and all, you would have done the activity of this ink bottle, a drop of ink when you drop it in a beaker of water. So how does the ink diffuse? So the first ink, the moment you drop ink in the beaker, you will see that ink drop will be more colorful or blue color at the point that you drop. So gradually the ink diffuses, right? So from the region of higher concentration to the region of lower concentration, and this process of diffusion continues till there is equilibrium that is reached. It means all the parts of the water is having same amount of ink, right? So the same process happens in amoeba also, that is in simple unicellular organism. Okay, so the moment they take in the food will start spreading in the entire parts of the body until and unless this equilibrium is reached. So that is the very simple method. But when you talk about the complex organisms like multicellular organisms, this process of diffusion is not sufficient because their body is already big. So if that food has to get diffused by itself, just one meal to reach the entire parts of the body, it will almost take 3 to 4 days. If it is a big and tall plant, it will take years together for this process of diffusion to get completed for just one meal, right? So therefore, the process of diffusion cannot happen in multicellular organisms. So there is some other specialized mode of nutrition. So again, when you talk about multicellular organisms, these multicellular organisms have plants and animals. The process of nutrition in plants and animals is not same. In plants, they will show autotrophic nutrition. So what do you mean by autotrophic nutrition? The word auto means self, right? So plants are the ones which will make their own food. The organisms which are capable of synthesizing their own food, making use of sunlight, water, carbon dioxide and chlorophyll. So this is what autotrophic nutrition means. So this is seen in green plants. But when you talk about animals, animals cannot synthesize their own food. So they will have to depend on plants for food. So in animals, you will see this kind of nutrition, that is heterotrophic nutrition. Heterotrophic nutrition means these organisms depend directly or indirectly on plants for food, right? So that is the definition for heterotrophic nutrition. Again, in heterotrophic nutrition, you have different kinds. So they can either be parasitic, they can be holozoic, they can be saprophytic or symbiotic. So what do you mean by parasitic mode of nutrition? So there are some animals which will depend on host body. In the sense, they will damage the host body and they derive the nutrient from that. So can you give me an example for parasitic mode of nutrition? Can you think of an example? See, example for this, you have leech and you have the lice that is growing on the hair, and you have this other moths and ticks and these things which is growing in the body of animals, and you have a plant that is called cuscuta which is growing on other plant. Even orchid is a parasite. So these parasites are the organisms which will try to derive nutrition from the host body. So host can be any animal or a plant, right? And then you have the process of holozoic nutrition. Holozoic nutrition is a process that is seen in human beings. See, the word holo means inside. The entire process of nutrition is happening inside the body of an organism. Then it is called as holozoic nutrition. Then we have saprophytic nutrition. See, saprophytic nutrition is seen in basically the fungus. So fungus will depend on the dead and decayed organisms for their food. So they eat the dead and decayed parts and they help in the process of decomposition. So that is what saprophytic means. There are some organisms which depend on dead and decaying organisms for food. So that is nothing but saprophytic organisms. And there is another kind of saprophytic organism that we basically call it as Coprophylus. See, if you are Coprophylus. So if you are a student who is trying to write some competitive exams, then these informations might be helpful for you. You can make a note in the textbook only. So you might be writing some NTSE exams or Olympiad exams, something like that. So for that, this information will be helpful for you. So Coprophylus nutrition is a kind of nutrition usually seen in few fungus. So these fungus will depend on the dungs of animal, like cow dung, pig dung and all the excreta, human excreta. So the organisms are seen depending on these excreta or dungs for food. Okay, so these organisms are basically called as Coprophylus organisms. And then you have the next one that is called as symbiotic organisms. What do you mean by the word symbiotic? It is nothing but the mutual understanding. You know lichens, right? Lichens or lichens. So this lichens is an association of algae and fungi. So these algae and fungi, both of them will live together so that both of them will be benefited from each other. Okay, so algae is a plant, so therefore it will try making food and it will make, by the process of photosynthesis, it makes food and it will give it to the fungi. So fungi will in turn provide shelter for the algae. So this is how they live together, right? It's like father and mother. Mother makes food, that is algae makes food, and father, that is fungi, it provides shelter for the algae, right? So this mutual understanding or the mutual relationship is called as symbiotic. So these are the different types of heterotrophic nutrition what we are seeing, and we will take up one by one now. So first thing we will see how the process of diffusion happens in amoeba, and we will also detailedly see how does autotrophic nutrition happens. Similarly, we will see how holozoic nutrition happens in detail. So in our next session, we will take up amoeba's nutrition.